which is our Hearts and Minds segment. We're going to start with commercial real estate with Marlene Jemal. And then we're going to go to residential real estate with Mike Lubin. And so, Marlene, I'm just going to, that's Mike, sorry. This is your website. You are a commercial advisor, real estate. And my light keeps falling down. Okay, there we go. Sorry. And we're going to unshare the screen. And I am blessed to say welcome to Marlene. Marlene, are you there? Say hi.
Hi, everybody. Great to see everybody.
Okay, so as I said, thank you for being here. Thank you for being here. I know we just opened, so you're probably like, your phone is ringing off the hook. You're probably grateful that you don't have to do all these Zooms anywhere and you could actually use a real phone, right? So let's get started, Marlene. So first of all, I always like to ask this one question because it's the Hearts and Minds segment, okay? What has been in your heart and what has been in your mind? Like, how are you feeling in true authenticity? I mean, we're trying to be optimistic now, but like, what have you, because I'm trying to be like the Barbara Walters of culture and business. You don't have to cry, but what's going on?
So I love your culture club because what I'm feeling right now as a group that we all have to get together as a culture. We have to get together as consumer, as owner, together and really fight what has been going on. Our hearts have been hurt. We've lost deeply. And what we have to do is come together and work together. And that's the key word, to make sure that through this pandemic, through post-COVID, that we get together, that we make sure that we implement safety measures, that we hear one another, that we communicate our needs with one another, that if we're going into an office, we want to make sure that we're safe. We want to have safe buildings. We want to have a safe environment. Restaurants, I know you went to an Israeli restaurant, my favorite as well. We want
to really? Oh, cool. At least I have good taste, right?
We want to make sure that we're safe, that maybe the menus are disposable, that we have the outdoor seating, hand sanitizers everywhere. We want to make sure that also our servers are wearing masks and they're taking precautions and washing their hands. And we don't forget what we've all been through in the past 3 months, and that we're taking all the safety measures still to make sure that we maintain and we go forward together as a group.
And so you've been really spending the last 3 months connecting with your clients and your customers and your employees, because we're all connected. All right. So before I ask you some more specific questions, just tell us exactly like what you do. What is a commercial real estate person in terms of what you do? And maybe tell us about, who some of your clients are. You don't have to name names, but what type of people, and what is your job?
So generally we're off market. We deal mainly with properties that really never get to hit the market. We deal because of our relationships with our landlords, with owners of buildings. We're able to really communicate with them when they're ready to sell, what's going on in the market, and really touch base with the sellers before it hits the market so that you avoid all of that, panhandling and competitiveness. We deal with a lot of office buildings, and we deal with multifamily buildings mostly. And we've had a large success doing that.
What do you mean by multifamily buildings? Because you do commercial, right?
We do commercial. So multifamily. So if you have about 20 residential buildings in a unit, mixed use buildings with retail on the bottom, that's also considered commercial.
Gotcha. Okay, so, and then you said office. Do you have customers that are in retail and restaurants and those spaces as well? Absolutely. Okay, so what are they thinking? I mean, I've been reading so much about stores closing, they're opening up. I just read something that Neiman Marcus is going to be, they rented a space in Hudson Yards, and Facebook is going to move in there, which is interesting. We had the retail apocalypse before, right? So what's happening now that COVID impacted all of
So
us?
we've been at a decline in retail from before COVID. So now imagine COVID. So it's really impacted greatly. Retailers are suffering, and you have national tenants like um, Neiman Marcus, who, now they're filed for bankruptcy, and, Simon Properties is suing them. And
Yeah, I did read that. And yeah, the Gap too, right? Are being sued too, I just read. So like, what does that mean? Why are they getting sued?
well, they're not paying their rent. And also so they've been suffering way before this pandemic. So now post pandemic, 3 months of not paying, it amounts to a 64 million, I guess, for Simon Properties not to get their rents right now, not being paid. And the national tenants are just, they're asking either for rent concessions or just not paying.
Wow. And let's just talk about office spaces, right? So, I've been reading, there's been so much press. I mean, I think now that we opened, right, I think only 10 or 20%, like, is that true, of New Yorkers are going back to work,
Yes.
even though we're open?
Yes, they're expecting 300,000 workers to come back to the city post the pandemic. We are getting a slow start. We're getting a slow start to getting into Manhattan, getting into the office space. People are still, they're taking their time getting back in there. But
And their bosses are letting them.
I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
their bosses are letting them.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes, phase two began on Monday. So yes, their bosses, everyone's excited. We've lost a lot of touch with reality in terms of connectivity, getting together, working together. Uh, just we've been isolated. So,
Are rents going down? It seems like, Neiman Marcus or Gap being sued. Like, are they going to kind of reconstitute their rents?
so what I'm saying and seeing is that there are we can negotiate rents. There are people leaving, and also owners want to have their tenants in place. So they
Oh,
will work together with the tenants.
okay.
Most of all, what I'm seeing is that the landlords are also reconfiguring their spaces and their buildings. They want to make sure that their tenants are safe. They're working on air purifiers, sanitational dispensers, um, just to make sure social distancing, all of that. They have to implement those office buildings so that the tenants, when they come in, they're feeling safe as well.
Uh-huh. And what about, I mean, do you think that a lot of companies are going to be closing their offices and moving out of New York City into other areas? I mean, I can't wait to talk to Mike about this because we've been reading about the exodus, not just the Hudson Valley, but in San Francisco, and, people are leaving. Is that a fear?
Of course, there's a fear, but you also have the technology companies who, we're in New York, we're in the greatest New York City hub ever. And a lot of talented people gathered here together.
Mm-hmm.
They're
Yeah,
gathered.
yeah, I'm just showing one thing. There was a piece that I'll put in the chat uh, about all these, companies that are stepping up to help office buildings and places to be safe. So yeah, this is just something that I found really interesting that I was curious about.
Yes,
Uh,
they're
you
doing
know,
touch-free elevators. They're going to limit the passengers in the elevator. They're really, before then we had the green building, energy efficient buildings. Now we're really focused on the safe buildings and the healthy buildings. And that this is going to be a new culture. Monday
a
Properties.
healthy building. That's interesting. Okay. That makes sense. Huh.
Yeah,
So we're green buildings. Yeah, that's one of the fears that I have. Like, we were probably culturally speaking at the pinnacle. Well, hold on, I put this in chat of the climate change, conversation pre-COVID. And now it just seems that, I'm fearful that we're going to stop thinking about green buildings. It's like, I just, everybody's using plastic forks now. That's not good for the environment. So, all right. So thank you for coming. I'd love you to stay on because I'm going to bring Mike on right now. So there might be some overlap. But last question I want to ask you, if you are buying commercial buildings, right, is this an opportunity?
Absolutely.
And, and,
I think
you
we
know,
need to wait further, Brad, to see where everything's going to fall, because we still have the grace period for, the mortgages, and landlords still are feeling their way into the investment and all their obligations. So I think coming this fall, going forward, I think we're going to be able to see and really capture on great advantages of the market.
and if retailers and restaurants don't come back, are they going to be empty in some of the cities like New York, or could they be turning into, maybe this is a question for Mike to chime in, Mike Lubin, why don't I introduce you before I ask the question? Mike Lubin.
Hello. Hi there.
You like my place, by the way? It's beautiful, right?
I love it. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you. So Mike Lubin is at Brown Harris Stevens residential. That's correct, right? Brown Harris Stevens.
Yep.
Residential real estate agent. And obviously, it's been challenging for you right now, and you're just opening up for business too right now. But I guess one of the things that, I'm curious for both of you, and then I'll move over to Mike, is that could you see a convergence? We saw Charles Renfrow, who is Diller Scofidio Renfrow, who he's the architect of the High Line. And we had him on a few weeks ago, and he basically said that he sees, by the way, he says nothing's going to be impacted by COVID. He's not changing anything. But, he sees a New York or a city culture where there might be these like living, breathing buildings where there's retail, there's, affordable housing, there's, hotels, co-working spaces, offices. Like if all these commercial places might go out of business and it's hard to replace them, do you think they might be replaced by homes? Like, will Mike take your business away?
I don't think homes, because buildings are zoned a certain zoning. So you're not going to turn commercial into homes, but you can turn it into, let's say, gyms, or reconfigure the space as, let's say, a ground floor office space, or, just converting that and just zone, and that you're occupying the space most efficiently. And again, that's part of working together and seeing what goes well, and the tenancy in place. You have the co-tenancy. You want to make sure that it all flows correctly.
Yeah. Well, maybe I see mergers and acquisitions, between commercial, even though Mike, you told me it's such a different thing. So let's switch to Mike. Thank you so much, Marlene. If you don't mind staying on, because people are asking questions if we have time in the end. You might have a different opinion than Mike, because a lot of the questions are the same. But Mike, when I spoke with you and I'm like, I really would love to talk commercial too. And you're like, that's a different thing. I have no idea, talk to somebody else. Why is it a different thing? Like why is it, are you experiencing different situations?
Well, first of all, I have to say how thrilled I am to join you today.
Thank you.
I'm not only a friend and admirer of yours for many years, but I absolutely love this series of work that you're doing and bringing different people together and speaking about contemporary topics and culture and everything relevant to today. So I'm thrilled to be here.
Thank you.
I also have to say I'm humbled, and I'm going to have a very tough act to follow. I can't get over just how insightful Marlene was with regard to not that I'm surprised she's someone I also have admired for so long, but just I took so much away from that incredible topic and presentation. And so I'm just thrilled to be here, and also really learned quite a bit just from the past few minutes.
Okay.
So tell me.
Now let's learn from you.
Let's hope so. So please repeat your question.
Yeah.
or
so, okay, you said it's a different thing, right? So
yes.
What do you think? I mean, you're not an expert.
Okay, I could tell you in a very basic way.
Yeah, yeah.
To me, the way they're different, and I'm sure it's a very subjective answer, is commercial or retail is very much a need-based business. Where a firm or a business, would need an X number of square footage in a particular location. And I personally think of real estate as a very emotional, residential real estate is a very emotional, need-based. Obviously, someone will have a particular desire for space, but it tends to be, even though we think of it as how much space do you need, it tends to be very want or desire driven versus, looking at square footage or an actual dollar amount of cap rate, in terms of recouping particular investment assets. So I think of it as desire versus a functional need.
And back to the hearts and minds, what have you been experiencing in the last 3 months? I mean, you stayed
Well, so
in New
today's
York,
a little
right?
bit hectic because, yeah, I've been in New York the whole time. So as Marlene mentioned, Monday was our first day where as residential and commercial real estate brokers that we've been permitted to actually do our job in person. So you can imagine I've had 3 months of backlog of sellers who want to get their apartments on the market, buyers who've been curious about what's going on. We're in a brand new experience in terms of how we may enter buildings and homes. We actually must submit liability and health waivers to indicate, in writing that the broker and that the buyer do not exhibit any symptoms and that they're in good health, and that the sellers require a liability, should anyone ever feel that a broker or buyer contracted an illness because of visiting in an apartment. It's surreal. It's absolutely, like you, I've been in this city the whole time. So I've experienced.
No, I actually haven't. I just got
Oh,
back.
I thought you've been here. Okay.
Yeah, no, I
Well,
was.
I have been here, and I feel very
So happy
blessed.
to be home. So happy.
Oh,
Like,
yeah.
night and
I've
day.
been here,
I don't
and
know how I build culture class in Connecticut. It's like now I feel I'm like books.
you mentioned you were in Chelsea last night. I figured you've been here the whole time. I've been here, since March. I've only been away a few days, so it's
So
been quite.
how have you been showing offerings? Because were people actually selling during this time?
We haven't been permitted to actually show apartments. So the work that we may have been doing, could have been staging, getting apartments ready. If buyers were in contract prior to the pandemic, there have been closings, but those deals were signed, most likely December, January, February. So there was that activity, but there was basically the industry itself was really on hold for the past 3 months. So there was activity in terms of closing and preparing apartments for sale. Potentially, a lot of what we're doing now is creating more of a virtual world.
Ask about that. Yeah.
Yeah, 3D. There's a brand called Matterport, and they have branded, I think, a very effective 3D tour of a home. So you really feel like it's self-guided. So you could actually walk yourself into closets, into
T-E-R-P-O-R-T.
Matterport, yes. And, if you, depending on how detailed you want to be, you're literally walking yourself around a room, you're looking into a pantry and a kitchen, and you're really getting a space, getting a sense of the space short of, the virtual glasses that we were potentially doing some years ago, on a self-guided way. And they're fantastic. So I'm putting all of my listings on tour because we really, the theme that I love from Marlene, which I want to focus on, is health. More than ever have we realized how valuable and precious our health is. And Marlene spoke about it with regard to, some years ago it was LEED certified and wanting to make sure that we're being conscious of the environment, which is of course as important, if not more than ever. But it's so much also about, is it a healthy, healthful feeling building? Is the building enhancing our health in some way versus somehow detracting? So hence a Matterport tour where we are exposing ourselves to fewer people, and we're only going to see an apartment that really is inviting us after we've spent more time researching it online.
So now people are starting to go into physical spaces, right?
Just as of Monday. So we're in day 3 of it.
Required to, like, what's the process? So say, hey, Mike, I saw this listing, go show it to me.
No, it's complicated now. So we have to have 2 signed documents. Well, first of all, there are 2 things. One, fair housing laws have changed. So we are sending a fair housing disclaimer that represents, which is obviously so incredibly important, that we are, have a very clear policy of of equal opportunity home viewing and ownership, and that we're proponents of fair housing rules. And in the past, it was something that would have been hoped and implied, but now it's actually something that we very appropriately are making clear in writing in advance, that we forbid any type of discriminatory housing. But now we also have to have two documents signed that are related to COVID. So one is a release of liability, and the other is a declaration of health, of our health before we could enter a home. And of course, we wear masks.
So how do you know that though? Like, how can you be honest about that? Like, you don't
Well,
know.
we hope that the person writing is they're signing that they do not have a fever, that they don't have any symptoms, that they are in good health, and it is in fact a legal document they are signing. And certainly someone could be asymptomatic and not know, but it's being taken quite seriously in this industry. We are very careful to not expose doormen and people who work within buildings, as well as residents and others, and homeowners who are very careful about their own health, want to be very sure that anyone coming into their home is healthy and well.
Are they wearing gloves? Are they wearing masks?
Well, we wear masks.
Okay.
We certainly, sanitize when we leave. We're not allowing guests to use a restroom. We're not using bathrooms in people's homes. We're restricting as much tactile of the experience as possible, in terms of touching as little as possible. And, can you hear me?
Yep, I can.
I'm sorry. And really limiting any type of exposure. So
yeah, I just wanted to show one thing that could be interesting. This is the new hot product. A bag you can
Oh God.
So
I'll be buying.
You might want to have those when
would be
you're walking through the door.
A good pitch or closing gift.
There you go. Okay, now let's talk Exodus, right? Are you seeing a lot more people who want to sell their place and or not be in New York anymore or in any other cities?
Well, we know that news media, everyone has to focus on a story, so the story for a little while had been, and probably still is, everyone's leaving the city. If you have a house in the Hamptons, you're moving to the Hamptons, you're moving to Greenwich and Westchester. And that is certainly true.
You just touched cash. Who uses cash anymore? Anyway.
You can't imagine what I'm doing. I just had windows cleaned and a new listing of mine, and I'm giving a tip to the wonderful gentleman, Alex, who does all my windows.
I love it. You in action.
So there are people who are leaving the city. In my personal business, the people who are leaving the city now or have asked me to sell their home or discuss selling their home, we're always going to be leaving the city. And it was a matter of timing. So maybe they thought it was going to be when they had their second or third child, and the plan was already there. I don't know anyone who has said to me, I've been happy in the city. I never thought I would leave. And now I'm ready to leave. I don't want to be here anymore. I'm not comfortable, or I don't feel safe here anymore. I personally have not had anyone say that to me. The people that I'm working with who have chosen to move elsewhere had already been planning to do so, and it was about timing. Certainly we saw
I've heard.
Yeah, and certainly we saw Florida had attracted many people, with regard to tax changes, and there's, and certainly people have decided to leave. What I think we're talking about in terms of an exodus is many people who, and certainly in New York, there's so many individuals who have second or third homes, and with school being on hold or camps, et cetera, they've chosen to spend more time. So from March, possibly through the rest of the summer, will be, Long Island, Hamptons, Westchester.
Right.
And I do believe it's very much school driven. If schools are again in person and classes resume in person in September, I believe these people will most likely be coming back. If it's virtual, if it's online.
By all of us working people have to say.
And that's the thing. And if school is online.
In the Wall Street Journal or New York Times, I can't remember.
If you have young kids and school is online, you most likely would be very happy to stay in your house, with your yard, and not return to the city until school resumes. So every case is different. But
what about, I have a friend who owns a place and he has rented it. He's a condo, not a co-op. And for those of you who don't know the difference, a co-op, you have a board that has to approve. I'm in a co-op, whether you could have somebody rent your place or not. Condos, you could do whatever you want. He has a condo. He's been renting it. And he literally just got an email from the tenant saying, we don't want to be in New York anymore. We want to leave. So have you heard those examples, and what's the protocol?
Well, the truth is there are those examples, certainly. But remember, this is not, and I was here during 9/11, and my son was about 3 months away from being born, and working in the city, and that was, and which we'll never recover from, but it was very much a New York experience, right? But what's so different about COVID is that this is a worldwide pandemic. It's an issue that the entire world is dealing with. So if one wants to leave New York, they could certainly decide to go to the West Coast or the Midwest or the Northeast. But as you highlighted earlier in the show, it's growing rapidly in certain areas and areas that we wouldn't necessarily think of. So we could leave, but then we're always where we end up, right? If we leave, there I am. So
Well,
it's not a New York situation.
I think more people, it might not be the safety thing. I think a lot of people are like, well, New York's not going to be New York anymore. You can't go to Broadway. And, Marlene, maybe you could chime in. You can't go to Broadway. All the stores are closing. Maybe they'll come back. It seems like you're both very optimistic, which you should be. There really isn't, you can't go to theaters. You don't want to ride the subway. New York isn't going to be New York. Do you think, what do you think about that? What do you think about New York? And right.
Look, things are changing. Obviously, New York has always been, I've also lived through the 70s. I've lived through the 80s. Many of us have seen New York go through different incarnations. And one of the positives that I see from the commercial standpoint, I love Marlene's take on it, is that I do feel that landlords had probably be in the past had probably been a little bit too inflexible in terms of rents that they were choosing. And I live on the Upper West Side. So half of Columbus Avenue prior to COVID was vacant because the smaller shops really couldn't afford to have to be in those locations. What I'm hoping is now we have such an interest and an appetite for retail, for cafes. I'm hoping that we're actually going to see a resurgence of new street activity because there is now such a hunger and a need for support of local businesses. In my own neighborhood, I'm seeing new places popping up where there had been empty storefronts. Yeah. I'm seeing it and I'm not going to pretend that things aren't changing, and of course they are, but they're changing all over the world. So it's going to take some time for this to recover. And we're looking at quite a long time, but I'm seeing a lot of wonderful positive change as well. So,
okay. It is a 3 minutes top the hour. There are some questions. I just want to respond and say one thing, and then I'll respond to Mike, and then I want to say one thing. One of the things that I am super hopeful for is one, maybe we'll become like Paris in New York, right? Where there are going to be
outdoor cafes,
yes.
Right?
And then secondly, because, real estate, or it might be cheaper to live here at some point, we might, all the, the artists were basically leaving the city because they couldn't afford it, and they were going to other places like LA and now LA is expensive too, but some of the more emerging cities like Pittsburgh and Kansas City and Nashville. I'm hoping that this becomes like the 70s and 80s, like you said, where there's going to be artists who are living here and coming back and reconstituting the heartbeat of what made New York.
And also, I should add, and I'm someone who as are you, who appreciates the different cultural aspects of New York, whether it's Lincoln Center or Broadway or off Broadway. It is devastating to realize that we do not have at this time the ability to gather in person for any of these experiences. And I'm not sure what that different incarnation will be until these different venues are deemed safe again. I think we're going to see a lot more outside, and if there is an opportunity, which as you mentioned, just with outdoor cafes, and if there's more of an opportunity for outdoor venues for entertainment. My son just graduated high school, and instead of a prom, there was actually a drive-in movie theater. And we certainly would love to see drive-ins return. We're looking at alternatives.
I actually just read a piece about drive-in concerts, right?
Well,
where, maybe
out of need, creativity
will sports anymore. Maybe we'll drive to a stadium now. Maybe that'll be interesting. We're going to go back to prehistoric times.
We're going to have to get creative.
Right.
We
So
have to be
we
creative.
do
That's
have
right.
to wrap up for the hour, but I don't, are you both like on the go if to answer questions? It's fine either way. If not, you know, people could email me the questions and we could always, you know, I could ask you guys to, you know, answer them just by the phone for everybody.
Sure.
Uh,
I have a few minutes if
Okay.
that would work.
Before I
If
go
there are
there,
any.
I just want to thank everybody again. This has been the summer semester, as I mentioned. Here's the Cindy Gallup. If you go to zeitguide.com/thank you, you could see all the videos we had, including last week's for the last 13. This was with Cindy Gallup, who was amazing in terms of helping us how to end racism in the corporate world. We're taking a break next week because it's the July 4th holiday. So we have 6 more summer semester classes that are going to go all the way to August 12th. And, you know, these are the people that we've had for the last 4 beginning summer semester culture classes. And then we are going to return to talk about publishing with the founders of Crown Magazine. And they are both Black. And I think I showed you the editorial that Lindsay actually wrote about, you know, what she really feels, how, you know, white people are responding to the racial injustice, the protests, and George Floyd's death. So I wanted to think about like all these publications as mid-tiers like Quartz and Refinery 29 and all these ones that emerged during the digital age are actually laying off a lot of people, where the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal have happened to actually rise in cultural cloud. They've survived mainly through events. And, you know, so I feel like the great legacy ones are surviving and thriving. The mid-tier new ones are really strapped right now. We'll see what happens. And then there's these niche magazines or publications that I really feel excited about. So we're going to learn from Lindsay and Nkrumah. And then the week after, an amazing woman I just met, Roxana Meron. She's a doctor, obviously, and she's a professor of medicine and the director of interventional cardiology, cardiovascular research, and clinical trials. And that's an other example of the intersection between COVID and the protests. Because as we know, many of the victims, a large majority of the victims are Black Americans because of a higher risk of heart disease, as opposed, and in addition, diabetes. And she's also going to tell us about what's been happening in the hospitals in terms of COVID and where we're going to go from there, and the future of heart health. We learned about the brain last week. We're going to go to the heart health. And so that's hopefully exciting. And then the rest after July 15th, I'll let you know who we're going to have. And of course, I like to highlight people from different industries. And so you can find out all about that, zeitguide.com/thank you. And so let's go through some questions. There was one that I was interested in. So what's going to happen to the people who are unemployed right now, especially in New York or everywhere in the world? You know, so they're losing their jobs. They don't have income to be able to afford New York City rent. Some who are closing their businesses. I know, Marlene, you just told me that like you can renegotiate, but if they're not in business, they have to close. And there are going to be a lot of bankruptcies, as the Wall Street Journal just reported a couple of days ago. Is there any wiggle room? What do we do? Do we have to leave? Do we have to break leases? Do we have to sell our places? So, you know, Marlene and Mike, you could both chime in on that.
I think there's definitely room for negotiation, but I was in touch with one of the major restaurateurs who are in the Hudson Yards. They own and operate lots of different restaurants, and they may have to close Hudson Yards because that's a fairly new restaurant that they opened, and they can't sustain it. So either the smaller business or the newer restaurants are going to either renegotiate their lease or really say to themselves, hey, I can't operate this. Let me just close up a couple of the newer restaurants or stores, and let me focus on the ones that are really successful and established.
Okay, and Mike.
Tune in.
Oh, sorry, Marlene, I just... What was the last thing you were going to say?
We really have to hone in on what's working for us as a business owner in terms of operation.
Now, some of these businesses who've gotten these loans could actually pay, but it's going to run out. It'll be interesting to see what happens. I mean, I guess if you're a landlord, you can't really penalize somebody if they go out of business, right? Or
Right.
can they?
No, they're not going to penalize it. They're going to do everything to keep the occupancy. They want their spaces occupied as much as you want to stay. So I think now is the time to really negotiate and communicate. I had mentioned and written to the guests there that it's important to negotiate, and communication is key. I think we're all going, we have to come together. And I know landlords, some of them can be tough, but I think if we communicate properly and really justify, perhaps maybe you're going to pay some rent now, or defer the rent for later. There are different ways to negotiate where the landlord doesn't feel like they're losing completely and that they're gaining as well. It has to be win-win on both sides.
Okay. And Mike, what about, I mean, I think there are leniencies for mortgages, but if you're renting, I mean, it's a gamble, because if I were a landlord, right, would want to keep the tenant, but I would also want to make the money. So if they're not paying me the money, they'll say, you got to leave. But on the flip side, it might be hard to get somebody else, right?
It's very much a case by case situation. If you're renting from one of the large managing agents, the Glenwoods and the Relateds, and that's a different story. Many people do rent homes in, it could be a 6-story townhouse. It could be a family who might own 10 buildings in Brooklyn and may have tenants. And I do imagine that those landlords are going to be probably more sympathetic to someone who's either lost their job or who has had an income reduction. And as Marlene said, no one wants to have to, I shouldn't say no one wants, but owners are not so eager to go and have to try to find new tenants who are going to pay on time. And if you've been a good client, if you've been a good tenant, I'm pretty sure they're going to want to work with you and hopefully make some concessions to keep you there. So it's we're all kind of playing this out as we go along.
Okay, I want to ask you one other thing. Mike, knowing you and seeing your website, you really have been good at, I'm just shifting to this, I just want to show, and Marlene, you could chime in on this too. Mike Lubin, look at that.
It's horrible.
Yeah.
I can't
No,
look at
it's
myself.
great. It's great. Oh, now you're hanging out in the snow, so maybe we'll have outdoor. You know what I said last week? A great opportunity is to get into the outdoor heater business, right? But you have an interesting brand, right? I mean, both of you. There's so many real estate agents in New York, everywhere in the world. How do you stand out?
So
Well,
there
you
are
know what?
80
We're
it was so.
Marlene, why don't you go first?
Yeah, there are 83,000 supposedly, approximately, brokers out there. Now they're saying because of the COVID, there's going to be probably about now 63,000. And what you need to do is to stand out, is stay in constant contact with the owners. You have to just work a little bit harder and reach out and have that cutting edge, where you have your relationship with your owners, where you have relationship with your buyers. For me, it's getting them the best deal and really focusing on what the needs are right now.
And how do you maintain your reputation? Do you get press? I mean, like, and
A lot of it is word of mouth. I do get press. It's finding off market deals where I can actually, I was told I make my sellers millions of dollars because I'm able to find that either key buyer to 1031 exchange or the right timing, or I'm able to get a great deal because of my relationship. Let's say on a multifamily property in Brooklyn, because they're selling a portfolio, and I'm able to get them a better deal because, again, of timing, of communication, and key is negotiation as well, and making sure that the buyer is in the right light for the seller. The seller always wants to make sure that their buyer is the right buyer for them. And
Okay.
communication
So
and trust.
it's more about word of mouth, trust. Mike, I know that, I trusted you, but you created, a brand for yourself through media. Look, you have a TV show, uh, but how important is that? Like, what would you say is your shtick, and how did you create that?
I think for me at least, the only thing that works is being true to who you are. And when in any professional situation, I think if we're trying to emulate a character or a competitor that we're seeing, and if it's not authentic to who we are, it's pretty apparent. So I just try to be myself. I'm interested in learning about a lot of different things in terms of reading and culture and spirituality and the outdoors. And so I'm always meeting new people. I'm always trying to become a better version of myself. I'm bringing that into my client interactions, in my marketing. My newsletter reflects sort of things that I'm going through in a real time way. It's my newsletter for the next period, which will be next week, kind of discussing the market we're in, is also going to be very much about the outdoors and how we find serenity outside and in nature, because I think so many of us
So you're
are
kind of,
craving.
so you said culture, which obviously is my thing. By the way, before I
Mhm.
forget, why don't you both put your contact information in the chat for people, and maybe
Sure.
they could even subscribe to you or whatever, or social media. Um, yeah, it's interesting to me because Mike, you just said culture, and you're talking about the environment around you, not just about the home you're selling, right? So like you can't just know about the niceties or the aspects of the home, right? You also,
No.
like there's a great, like Chelsea, there's these, like about Marlene, you say like maybe this is a way you could collaborate. Like tell them about my ZZ Cafe that I just opened, and Mike could be like, oh, down the street is, so but like you said spirituality and culture, so like it really depends on your personal brand because people have to like you. I mean, real estate agents
And
never
for some people, their brand may be that they're a ruthless negotiator. Everyone has their brand can be that they are working 24 hours a day. So and their brand could also just be that I'm hardworking and I'm going to show up and be courteous and professional. So it doesn't mean that you have to have such a distinctive identity per se, but I do think that we have to be true to who we are, and if we love travel, if we love cooking, bring that into our work. That makes us more interesting to our clients. It draws people to us because we are multidimensional and not just a broker. No one's just a doctor or a lawyer. We are, we're complex. And when you hire a real estate broker, residential or commercial, you're hiring a life expert. It's an expert on that particular city, and that covers a lot of different ground.
So yeah, you need to know that in addition to everything else.
Sure.
Hey, any other last thing I'll ask, and then we could close it. Any other observations you've both been seeing about? I mean, I know you're mainly New York based, and I know you have some properties in Jersey, Marlene. So do you see any other opportunities or interesting developments in other cities in the country, like people knowing that they have to work from home, they could work from anywhere? Do you see, like we talked about the exodus, but not so much New York exodus? Like, are you hearing about other places of opportunity? Uh, Curious.
I think it's going to be about nature. It's going to be about the outdoors. So if someone can't afford a home outside of where they're living, then they may rent one or they'll go camping. We are safest, of course, although we see these pictures of people in beaches, cheek by jowl, so to speak, in Miami. But if we're in nature, if we're at a beach, if we're on a mountain, if we're rock climbing, we're safe and we're healthy. So I think more than ever, there will be an appreciation for being healthy in nature and feeling the gratitude for that, which I hope also leads to more appreciation, awareness of the ecosystem and ecology and land conservation. So that's kind of where I see a trend, hopefully, and hopefully it's not just a trend; it's a lifelong new chapter. Being more aware and grateful for resources and being in nature.
Okay. Well, So how do you do that in a city? You just find a city that's close to nature that you could.
Or I'm in Central Park every day. You know, I bought a bike a few months ago. You could bike up the Hudson within an hour of New York. As you know, you could be hiking, you could be fishing, you feel like you're in another planet. New York is one of the most blessed states in terms of access, close access to the cities for beautiful, unspoiled nature. So it's readily available for people who are
And we
interested.
will get through this. We will get through this. And we have to just nurture ourselves while we're going through the slow process of healing and moving forward.
Talk about
Absolutely.
spirituality. Maybe I should fire my shrink and just talk to you every day. Anyway, I'd fire my shrink. I'm just kidding. Anyway, thank you both for coming.
Thank you so much for having us.
I love Culture Class. I love hearing from such interesting, intelligent leaders like both of you, Marlene and Mike.
Thank you.
I wish you both the best of luck. Like you said, we've been through this in terms of 9/11 and then the Great Recession. This is a little bit more complicated, I think. And the other thing is that I hope we all think about is like, obviously we want to change the racial and financial inequality in the world. And, you know, one of the other things that I'm really hoping about this is not only will we bring in more artists, but, you know, we will think about how neighborhoods and housing and zoning is really creating, you know, racial tension and injustice and impacting poor education in poorer neighborhoods. So, you know, I'm hoping that everybody in your business thinks about that too moving forward. So I wish.
That's in our business. And I'm sure Mike can agree that that's all racial equality and getting together and as one. That's extremely important. And I think the real estate world really focuses on that. And absolutely, that's important. But we
Okay.
all need to be safe, I have to say, just right this moment. Just really feel safe and heal.
Yes.
Safe and healthy. That's the new trend. All right. Thank you so much. Thank you,
Thank
everybody,
you.
for coming. Again, next week, we're skipping the week after July 8th, that Wednesday, 2 p.m. East Coast time, 11 a.m. Pacific Coast time, 6 p.m. GMT, 7 p.m. UK, 8 p.m. Europe. I think everybody in Asia will be sleeping, but they could see the recording. And thank you all who contributed. I love doing this and hope we could keep doing it. Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.